In this video I'm going to talk about Freud's three-part theory to personality. Many of you may be familiar with the terms id, ego and superego. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Freud meant by that and tie it into the Advaita non-dual message. Original German is das Es, das Ich, das Über-Ich. Unfortunately, in my opinion, Latinized in the translation, but the English translation is das Es is the it, das Ich is the I, and das Über-Ich is the over-I. So that's the it, the I, and the over-I. I think that gives a better flavour of human personality personally. So I'll just keep reminding us of when we say id, that's the it, and Freud described this as the animalistic instinctual self, the blind subconscious drives, aggression, sex, hunger. The superego is the moral conscience, the part of us that wants to be better than those animalistic urges. We recognize in ourselves that we are susceptible to those base human instincts, and so we do our best to transcend them, to act morally and virtuously, to try and attain a higher sense of self and being in the world. This comes through as forgiveness, compassion, loving one's fellow human, trying to relieve suffering, trying to be the best version of yourself, that phrase. And of course most people live in the middle ground, the ego, the I, and that is trying to mediate between those two worlds, trying to placate the drives that we are born with, and trying to find that moral high ground, to reach the personal consciousness that rises above those instinctual desires and drives. And the theory is this three-part theory of personality, that most people do live in that middle ground, the ego or the I, aspiring to reach the dizzy heights of the superego or the over-I, whilst also unfortunately being tempted and often giving in to the instinctual needs, the id or the it. And so we find ourselves torn between these three competing versions of ourself. Those who give in mainly to the id, the it, das Es, live hedonistic lives of pleasure seeking and immediate gratification, and we can all imagine how that would play out, and it's usually not good news either for the individual or for those who happen to share the life with that person. And then we might recognize in ourselves, or perhaps in others, a standard to which we would like to match, to attain, to be our default position, and this is the superego, the over-I, das Über-Ich. And this is a place that many people want to reach a state of mind where they feel at peace with their own thoughts and actions in the world. They try to have that moral conscience, both internally and act that out externally, and try to live a virtuous and moral life. And of course, what that means plays out differently for each individual. But we can all sense this three-part definition of personality, and that's why I think it's successfully stood the test of time, because people recognize they have the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, and their head is in the middle, being pulled one way and trying to aspire to live in the other direction, and the little voice in the ear telling you what you need and what you want despite the consequences, and that's a temptation that we all face. And then the moral conscience telling us what we ought to do, and that plays out differently. What virtue and morality is does play out differently for individuals, and of course what the id, the instinctual desires, and the hedonistic lifestyle, again, that is will be unique to each individual, but we can all recognize the general broad strokes of that description, and I think that's why it seems to work. We recognize in ourselves when we're torn between what we should do and what we want to do, and a lot of that is about impulse control, conscientiousness, doing the right thing, sacrifice too. So where does this theory stand when we start to talk about the deeper sense of the being, the transcendent self, the absolute, the I before I am, this very difficult place to name, but a place that can be experienced? And that place is an experiential way of being. It exists beyond the personality and those three levels, those three stages, or those three demarcations. It's within each, but separate from each. So, if the filter of the personality drops away, and in past videos I've talked about the egoic constructed identity, and when I say that, I'm referring to the whole personality, not dividing it into three separate ideas. So when that egoic construct is seen through, then we are at the ground of our being, and that can be experienced. And then the surface level drama plays out, the dance of life, and we can call it id, ego and superego, and we can recognize that dance as it plays. But we aren't carried away by it in the same way as perhaps we were in the past, or as perhaps we see it playing out in others. We recognize it as an interesting sideshow. It doesn't have the same pull, the same drama, the same reality, the same hooks into our sense of self, because we are then free from the strong identity, the influence of those personalities. So yes, we can still recognize an instinctual and animalistic base to our nature, and how we navigate that in the world through the ego, the intermediary, and how we would like to improve on that, and how we want to see ourselves and how we want others to see us. But all those things are part of the illusion of self. They are a dance of Maya, and we can recognize it as such, as a illusionary dance. And because we can do that from this other place of being in the world, then those personalities and those forces don't have the same strength within us. They don't affect our lives in the same way. We see through it, and the more we see through it and the more we live in this deeper sense of being in the world, the less and less those constructed ideas of self and personality play out, and the freer we become from them. We can still recognize them in ourselves and in others, but they're not going to have the same effect. They're not going to have the same devastation as they would have in the past, because they don't have the necessary gravitas. They're not real, and we see through them. And the wheels still spin. We still dance in the illusionary self for a while, but gradually that wheel slows down and slows down. It's like a fan plugged into the electric supply. When we pull the plug, the fan carries on turning for however long until eventually it stops. And so when we see the truth of our being and we recognize that experiential way of living, then the plug has been pulled and the fan is gradually slowing down to a standstill. The spinning fan is the idea of ourself and all the drama that enfolds in that, and how we might want to view it, including the it, the I and the over-I, the id, the ego and the superego. They are all just a play and a dance of Maya, and then we rest in the eternal present, and the flow of life then gives full force through us without being filtered by any notions of who we are and how we should or shouldn't behave in the world. That drops away, and we see with clarity for perhaps the first time.